The flatbed truck backed into my driveway at 9 in the morning, and my son-in-law stood beside it holding a clipboard he did not know how to fill out. I did not run outside. I did not scream. I stood on my porch in my robe with my coffee going cold in my hand and watched a man I have known for 11 years try to repossess a truck that belonged to my dead husband. If you have ever had someone bet everything on you not knowing your own life, stay with me for the next 20 minutes and hit subscribe now, because I am about to tell you exactly what I did with that bet. My name is Diane Holt. I am 64 years old, and for 31 years I worked behind a desk at the Department of Motor Vehicles in the Title and Lien Division, 3 towns over from where I live now. People hear that job and picture stamps and waiting numbers and a line that never moves. It is not that. It is the place where the truth about who owns what in this country gets written down in permanent ink, one form at a time, checked against another form, checked again. I processed something close to 9,000 of those across 3 decades. Title transfers, liens filed the day a loan closes, liens released the day the last payment clears, and repossession notices, more of those than I ever wanted to count. I know the exact shape a real one takes before it's legally allowed to touch a driveway. I know which of the 7 fields on that form has to be filled in first, and by whom, and how many business days have to pass before a recovery company can even legally be dispatched. I know it the way some people know Scripture. My husband Frank never once asked me a single question about any of that in 38 years of marriage, because Frank had his own kind of precision, and it lived in a different building entirely, our garage. He found that truck at an estate auction 11 years before he died, a 1974 Ford, faded International Harvester red, engine seized solid, the bed rusted clean through in 2 places you could see daylight through. He rebuilt the carburetor himself twice before he got the idle right, kept a coffee can of the original bolts on a shelf above the workbench because he refused to replace a single one he didn't absolutely have to, and he could tell you, without looking, that the truck had 61,200 miles on it the day he bought it. He died 4 years ago this March, on a Tuesday, in the same bed I still sleep in. That truck is the last thing in my life that still smells like the inside of his flannel jacket if I sit in the cab with the windows up on a warm afternoon. My daughter Renee married Marcus Doyle 6 years ago. In a backyard ceremony, Frank walked her through on a cane he pretended he didn't need yet, gripping her arm a little too tight, laughing about it after. Marcus was charming that day. He complimented my dress, hugged me twice, told Frank he'd take care of her. Marcus is still charming most days. I have learned, slowly and at real cost, that charm and honesty are not the same muscle, and a man can have a great deal of one and almost none of the other. Since Frank died, I've kept a routine that would probably look strange written down. Coffee at 6, the garage light on by 7, whether I go out there or not, because he always kept it on that early, and some habits outlive the reason for them. I don't go out there every single morning, but I like knowing the light is on, the same way I like knowing exactly how many miles are on that odometer, exactly which drawer holds the 3/8 sockets, exactly what a real piece of paper is supposed to look like before someone hands it to you and asks you to trust it. It started small, 4 months before that truck ever showed up on a flatbed, the way these things always start small. Marcus began bringing up the Ford at family dinners like it was a liability sitting in my garage instead of a memory I was allowed to keep. The first time, in June, he said, almost gently, "That thing's just sitting out there depreciating, Diane. You know that, right?" I said I knew exactly what it was worth, better than he did, and let it go. 3 weeks later, he asked, over dessert, whether my insurance still covered a vehicle that old, whether I'd even checked the policy since Frank passed. I had. I told him so. He nodded, like he hadn't really wanted the answer, only wanted to plant the question. In August, he offered, twice in the same conversation, to, quote, "take a look at the paperwork on the Ford." Said a man my age shouldn't have to deal with titles and registrations alone. said it like a kindness. I have spent 31 years listening to people ask about ownership for 100 different reasons, and most of those reasons are exactly as innocent as they sound. But I have also learned that the people who ask the same casual question 3 separate times, in 3 slightly different disguises, 4 weeks apart, are rarely being casual at all. They are checking, gently, whether a door is locked. At Thanksgiving, Renee mentioned in passing, quickly, almost swallowing it, that Marcus's contracting business had hit a rough stretch with a supplier, that a payment of something like $14,000 on financed equipment had come due faster than he expected, and that he'd been making calls all week trying to move money around before a deadline he wouldn't name out loud in front of anyone. She said it like it was nothing. I filed it away the same way I used to file away a lien recorded one single day too late. It means nothing by itself. It only means something once you find the second fact sitting right next to it. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, at a Sunday dinner at my house, Marcus tried a different angle entirely. He asked casually over the pot roast whether the truck's title was still in Frank's name alone, or whether it had ever been transferred into mine after he passed. I told him the truth. It had been transferred, properly, 8 months after the funeral, filed the same way I'd filed thousands of other people's transfers for 31 years. Clean, current, sitting in my name and nobody else's. He nodded slowly at that, the way a man nods when a plan he's been building just lost one of its load-bearing walls, and changed the subject to football before Renee could ask why he cared. I remember setting down my fork and thinking, very clearly, that a man only asks a question like that if the answer changes what he's able to do next. I didn't say any of that out loud at the table. I just made a note of it, the way I used to make a note of anything that didn't quite line up on a form, and went back to my pot roast like nothing at all had happened. The second fact arrived on a Tuesday in February, almost exactly 11 months after Marcus's first comment about the Ford depreciating in my driveway. He called ahead that morning, which should have told me something all on its own, because in 6 years of marriage to my daughter, Marcus has never once called ahead about anything. He said a man from the recovery company needed to come by about the truck, that there had been some confusion involving a loan Frank had apparently taken out against the vehicle years before he died, that it had gone unpaid, gone to collections, and finally caught up with the title. I asked him to send me the paperwork first, before anyone drove out. He said the company didn't work that way, that the driver would bring everything with him, that it would all make sense once I saw it in person, and that I really shouldn't worry, he'd handle most of it for me. I made a full pot of coffee that morning that I did not plan on drinking, because 31 years behind that desk taught me something else. Stalling is not the same thing as hiding, and a woman who offers coffee to a man serving her papers looks like hospitality, not suspicion, and buys herself 4 or 5 extra minutes nobody thinks to begrudge her. At 9 o'clock, the flatbed pulled into my driveway, engine idling low, hydraulics ticking as they settled into place against the asphalt. Marcus stood by the cab in a collared shirt he doesn't usually wear on a Tuesday, holding a clipboard against his chest like a shield he wasn't entirely sure would stop anything. The driver stayed near the truck's controls the entire time, a heavy-set man who introduced himself only as Ray, mid-50s, sun-worn hands, a faded company logo on his cap that I did not recognize from any of the 11 licensed recovery companies operating in this county, a fact I happen to know cold because I'd renewed every one of their licenses myself at some point across 3 decades. Ray didn't come toward the porch at all in those first few minutes. He stayed by the winch controls, arms crossed, watching Marcus do the talking the way a man watches someone else make a promise he isn't sure he can keep. I stepped out onto the porch with 2 mugs, one for me, one I set down on the porch rail like I might offer it to whoever wanted it, and I asked, pleasantly, if anyone wanted to come inside and go over the paperwork properly at the kitchen table, where the light was better and I could read it without squinting. Marcus said there wasn't time for that the truck needed to be off the property before noon or the fees would double, that this was already a favor him getting the sheriff's office to hold off until today at all. I said that seemed like an odd kind of urgency for a lien that had apparently been sitting unpaid for years already, and Marcus's jaw moved slightly, the way a man's jaw moves when a sentence he didn't expect lands somewhere it shouldn't have. He recovered quickly, said something about how these things always move fast once they're finally assigned to a recovery company, and held the clipboard out again, a half step closer to me this time. Marcus did the talking, the way he always does, at family gatherings, at holidays, at every moment where a room needs someone confident standing in the middle of it. He said the lien had been filed against the Ford before Frank died, that it had gone to collections, that the company had finally located the vehicle through DMV records. His exact words, said directly to a woman who spent 31 years being the DMV records without a flicker of hesitation, and that if I just signed the release of possessory interest right there on his clipboard, we could avoid the county sheriff getting involved by the end of the week. He held the pen out to me first, before the paper, like the pen itself was the emergency and the reading could come later. I did not take it. I looked down at the form instead, upside down from where I stood on the porch step, and in about 4 seconds I noticed 3 separate things, one after another, the way you notice 3 loose threads on the same sweater once you've spotted the first one. The lien holder's name typed at the top of the page did not match the name Marcus had said out loud, not 90 seconds before. 2 different companies, 2 different addresses. The vehicle identification number printed on the form was 1 single digit short of the number stamped into the inside of Frank's driver's door, a number I had read aloud to myself so many times over 11 years of watching him work on that truck that I could recite it half asleep. And the case number field, the one field that by law has to be filed with the county clerk before any recovery company is permitted to dispatch a truck to a private residence, sat there completely empty, not filled in incorrectly, blank the way a form looks the night before someone writes it in a hurry, hoping nobody reads that far down the page. I noticed a 4th thing, too, smaller than the other 3, easy to miss if you hadn't spent 31 years staring at the bottom corner of exactly this kind of paper. The notary stamp in the corner was dated a Sunday. County notaries in this state do not work Sundays. I have never once, in 3 decades, seen a legitimate notarization dated a day the office was closed. What I did not know yet, and would not know for another 6 days, was that the truck itself was never really the point of any of it at all. I asked Marcus, in a voice I kept perfectly even, who the loan servicer actually was, since the name printed on the paper and the name he'd said out loud twice now belonged to 2 entirely different companies. And in my experience, that only happens 2 ways: an honest clerical mistake, or a document written by someone in a hurry the night before, borrowing a real company's letterhead to make a fake one look convincing. He said it was a subsidiary, some technical relationship between companies, and waved his free hand through the explanation instead of naming a single one of them. I asked him, next, why a notary would have stamped a legal document on a Sunday, when every notary office in this county is closed that day, every single one, without exception, for as long as I've been alive. He said maybe it was a mobile notary, one who works weekends. I asked for that notary's name and commission number, both of which are required, by law, to appear directly beneath any valid stamp. There was no name printed beneath his stamp at all, just the stamp itself, pressed a little too hard into the paper, like someone had practiced the angle more than once before committing to it. Marcus's eyes moved to Ray for the first time since the truck had arrived, the way a man looks toward an exit he hasn't used yet but is starting to consider. I turned to Ray next and asked, just as calmly, for his recovery agent bond number. The number state law requires to be posted visibly on the side of any repossession vehicle before it's allowed to touch private property. The same number I checked against a state registry probably 400 times across my career, back when 400 still felt like a large number to me. Ray looked at the side panel of his own truck, slowly, The way a man looks somewhere he's already fairly sure there's nothing to find. There wasn't. I asked Marcus the second question in the very same breath. Quiet, with no theater in it at all. Just a woman stating a fact and waiting to see what happened to it. Marcus. I processed 9,000 of these in 31 years, and every single real one starts with a case number filed at my old desk, before that truck is ever legally allowed to leave the ground. So tell me the number. Right now, and I will sign anything you want. His mouth opened. Nothing came out of it for what felt like a very long 5 seconds. His hands, which had been holding that clipboard perfectly steady against his chest the entire time, started to shake. Just slightly at first, then more. The particular way hands shake when a person understands, in real time in front of witnesses, that the story they built is standing on absolutely nothing. Ray was the one who moved first, and he moved fast. He said, flatly, not unkindly, that he wasn't putting his name or his truck on a tow with no filed lien number and no bond number to show for it. That he'd been doing this job 11 years and knew exactly what kind of trouble an unfiled repossession turns into, and that trouble lands on the driver, not the man who hired him. He climbed back up into his cab without waiting for Marcus to argue a word of it. The flatbed pulled out of my driveway empty, the same way it had pulled in, only slower this time, like even Ray wanted every second of that reversal to be visible from where I stood on the porch. Marcus stood alone in the driveway for a moment that felt much longer than it actually was, clipboard still pressed against his chest, engine noise fading down the street behind him. He didn't apologize. He didn't try to explain himself. He said something short about a misunderstanding with the paperwork, picked his keys up off the hood of his own car, and drove away without once looking back toward the house. I did not chase him down the driveway shouting questions. I did not call Renee that same hour demanding answers, because 31 years behind a desk taught me something that has nothing to do with vehicles at all. The person who stays calmest the longest is usually the one left holding the most accurate version of what actually happened. I went back inside, sat down at Frank's workbench in the garage, the one with his handwriting still on masking tape, labeling 3 different drawers of sockets, and poured the coffee I'd made for a stranger into my own cup instead, and drank it slowly, and let my hands stop shaking on their own time. Renee called that evening, her voice careful in a way it hadn't been in years, and asked what had happened. I told her the truth, all of it, in the same flat, even voice I'd used on Marcus that morning, because she deserved the facts more than she deserved my anger. She was quiet on the line for a long time, long enough that I asked if she was still there. She said she was. She didn't defend him, and she didn't cry, and she didn't ask me to let it go. She just asked me to send her a photograph of the paperwork, and I did, right there while we were still on the phone, and she didn't say anything else about it that night. The next morning I called Carol, who sat 2 desks down from me for 19 of my 31 years there, and asked her, as a favor, to pull whatever she could on a lien filed against a 1974 Ford registered to Frank Holt. She called back 2 days later and said there was nothing. No lien, no case number, no record of any recovery company ever requesting information on that vehicle, not once, not ever, in the entire history of the file. She said it a little carefully, the way you say something to a friend when you already suspect what it means for her family. I thanked her, and I told her I needed 1 more day before I did anything else with what she'd found, because I wanted to see the actual document with my own eyes first, not just hear that it was fake secondhand. 6 days later, I drove to my old office, not to make anything official. I've been retired 3 years now. I have no authority left in that building at all. But because an old colleague of mine still owed me a favor from a lifetime ago, and because I wanted to see with my own eyes exactly what document Marcus had actually been holding out for me to sign. It was never a release of possessory interest underneath, not really. Folded into the same clipboard packet, 3 pages back, in smaller print than the page on top, was a durable power of attorney, broad enough to hand him control over any vehicle title in my name, any account, any piece of paper I own, the moment I sign the page sitting on top of it. The truck was never the target. The truck was the excuse, the thing loud enough and sentimental enough to make me sign fast without reading past page 1. 31 years at that desk taught me exactly one thing above every other thing it ever taught me. A piece of paper does not become true because it looks official, and it does not become true because somebody hands it to you fast enough that you don't have time to read past the first page. It becomes true the day you sign it, and not one single second before that. I still park that Ford in the same spot in the garage every night. Under the bulb. Frank wired himself back in 1987. And some nights, I still walk out there, just to sit in the driver's seat for a few minutes before I go to bed. Renee and I are still talking. Most days. Marcus and I are not, and I honestly don't know yet what that means for Thanksgiving this year, and I'm not going to stand here and pretend that I do. If this is the kind of story you needed today, hit subscribe, because there's another one like it waiting for you next week, sometimes sooner than that. And if anyone has ever handed you a paper and told you to sign it before you had time to read it all the way to the last page, I hope you do exactly what I did. Ask the one question they never once expected you to know how to ask.